In the early decades of the 20th century, the world was still reeling from the aftershocks of the First World War. The United States had emerged from that conflict as a growing power, both economically and militarily, but many Americans still clung to isolationist instincts. Across the Pacific, however, Japan was rising with a very different vision. The Empire of Japan, ambitious, militarized, and driven by an ideology that combined nationalism, imperial expansion, and a deep sense of destiny, sought dominance in Asia and the Pacific. Its military leaders believed Japan's survival depended on securing natural resources and establishing a sphere of influence unchallenged by Western powers. This vision inevitably set it on a collision course with the United States. By the 1930s, Japan had already demonstrated its aggressive expansionist policies. The invasion of Manchuria in 1931, followed by the full-scale war with China in 1937, drew worldwide attention and condemnation. Reports of atrocities like the Nanjing massacre horrified many, but diplomatic protests did little to deter Tokyo's ambitions. The U.S., though not directly engaged in conflict, watched closely. American businesses had extensive ties with China, and there was also a moral outrage at Japanese militarism. Over time, Washington began to impose economic sanctions, restricting exports of steel, oil, and other materials vital to Japan's war machine. Each restriction was perceived by Tokyo not just as a political measure, but as a direct threat to its survival and national honor. The United States, for its part, had significant interests in the Pacific. Hawaii, located thousands of miles from the mainland, had become a crucial military outpost. Its harbors, especially Pearl Harbor on the island of Oahu, were strategic for both naval operations and the projection of American power across the ocean. The Philippines, Guam, and other territories further emphasized America's presence in Asia. Japanese military planners understood that any long-term domination of the Pacific would be impossible as long as the U.S. Navy had the capacity to intervene. Thus, the seeds of confrontation were planted well before December 7, 1941. The months leading up to the attack were marked by escalating tension and stalled diplomacy. Japanese officials continued to negotiate with American diplomats in Washington, presenting proposals that sought recognition of Japan's dominance in Asia, particularly in China and French Indochina. The U.S., under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, was unwilling to make such concessions. While Roosevelt had to balance the isolationist tendencies of Congress and the American public with the growing awareness that global fascist powers threatened international stability, he also believed strongly in supporting nations resisting aggression. Aid to China continued, and coordination with Britain and the Netherlands, the latter of which controlled resource-rich colonies in Sophia. The first light of December 7, 1941, crept over the horizon of Oahu with the gentle calm of another Sunday morning. The island seemed wrapped in tranquility, its beaches kissed by soft waves and its towns stirring slowly awake. Church bells prepared to ring, soldiers and sailors expected a leisurely day, and many men aboard the battleships at Pearl Harbor remained in their bunks. The tropical air carried no hint of the catastrophe about to unfold. Yet even as Hawaii welcomed the dawn, squadrons of Japanese aircraft, having launched from carriers far out at sea, closed in on their target with silent precision. At 7:49 a.m., the order to attack was transmitted from the Japanese commander Mitsuo Fukuda, circling above in his bomber. His coded message, Tora! 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 Signaled that complete surprise had been achieved. In the distance, black specks grew larger against the sky as the first wave of planes descended toward Oahu. Torpedo bombers skimmed low over the ocean surface, dive bombers climbed high before turning downward, and fighters prepared to strafe airfields and anti-aircraft positions. Below, the unsuspecting American fleet lay moored in neat rows, battleships lined along Battleship Row, their crews largely unprepared for the storm about to crash upon them. The first torpedoes streaked across the harbor waters at 7:55 a.m., cutting clean white trails before slamming into the hulls of massive battleships. The USS Oklahoma took multiple hits in quick succession, her steel sides buckling and her decks shuddering under the force. Within minutes, she began to list dangerously, sailors scrambling for exits as compartments flooded. On the USS West Virginia, explosions tore open her hull, engulfing the ship in flames. Nearby, the USS Arizona was struck by armor-piercing bombs. One bomb penetrated her forward magazine, detonating hundreds of thousands of pounds of gunpowder in a single cataclysmic blast. The ship erupted in a fireball so violent it was seen miles away, lifting her forward turret skyward and instantly killing over 1,000 men. The harbor shook with the force of the explosion, and black smoke billowed into the sky like a signal of war. Across the base, chaos erupted as sailors scrambled to man anti-aircraft guns, only to find ammunition locked or unavailable. Pilots at nearby airfields raced to their planes, but many aircraft were destroyed on the ground before they could take off. At Hickam Field and Wheeler Air Base, Japanese fighters strafed rows of parked aircraft, turning runways into burning wreckage. Hangars collapsed under bomb strikes, mechanics and airmen caught in the firestorms. In minutes, America's aerial defense on Oahu was crippled, leaving the sky to the Japanese attackers. As the second wave of planes swept in, the assault intensified. Dive bombers screamed downward, releasing bombs with shrieking whistles before pulling up into the sky again. Torpedoes hammered more battleships, and strafing runs cut Dow. The smoke that had hung thick over Pearl Harbor on December 7 slowly began to clear as rescue efforts carried into the following days. Burnt wreckage was still being extinguished, oil slicks covered the harbor's waters, and divers searched the twisted hulls of sunken ships for any sign of survivors. The death toll climbed steadily, reaching over 2,400 American servicemen and civilians. Hospitals on Oahu overflowed with the wounded, many suffering burns, shrapnel wounds, or broken bones from collapsing structures. Families of sailors and soldiers frantically sought news of loved ones, while chaplains delivered devastating messages of loss to wives, mothers, and children. The scale of destruction was nearly incomprehensible, yet amidst the carnage a spirit of determination began to take hold. President Franklin D. Roosevelt wasted no time in preparing his address to Congress. On December 8, 1941, he stood before the American people and the world, calling December 7 a date which will live in infamy. His words resonated with a nation that had, until then, been divided over entering the global conflict. The shock of Pearl Harbor unified Americans in a way nothing else could. Isolationist voices grew silent as Congress voted almost unanimously for a declaration of war against Japan. The United States, once hesitant, was now fully committed to the fight. Across the Pacific, Japanese leaders celebrated what they perceived as a stunning success, unaware that they had awakened a giant with an industrial capacity and national spirit that would prove impossible to match. The immediate aftermath in Hawaii was marked by fear and uncertainty. Rumors spread of an imminent Japanese invasion, prompting blackouts, air raid drills, and the hurried fortification of beaches. Japanese Americans living in Hawaii and on the mainland faced suspicion and hostility. Authorities worried about espionage or sabotage, and in the months that followed, thousands of Japanese Americans on the mainland were forcibly relocated to internment camps under Executive Order 9066. It was one of the darkest chapters of the American home front, as loyal citizens were imprisoned solely because of their ancestry. Militarily, the United States faced a daunting challenge. Battleships lay in ruins, though not all were beyond repair. The USS Arizona was a total loss, a permanent tomb for more than 1,100 sailors, but ships like the USS West Virginia and USS California would be raised, repaired, and eventually returned to service. The true stroke of fortune for America was that the aircraft carriers, the most crucial vessels in modern naval warfare, had not been in port during the attack. They were out at sea, and their survival would prove decisive in the coming battles. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz was appointed commander of the Pacific Fleet, tasked with rebuilding American naval power and turning shock into strength. In Japan, the attack was hailed as a triumph. Newspapers trumpeted victory, and